we want to look at today. First thought in the morning, last worry of the night. Our Goliath can dominate our day and infiltrate our night. It can leave us feeling almost like we're in a black hole with no way out. He haunts us, and there's all kinds of examples, maybe bills we can't pay, people we can't please, habits we can't break, relationships maybe we can't mend, failures we can't forget, future we can't face. And maybe we don't have just one Goliath. Have you ever thought about this? Maybe we have his whole family. Giants, we all face them, yet we need not face them alone. We read this story, we've known this story since we were little bitty kids, and, we wonder what God saw sometimes in David. He fell as often as he stood, he stumbled as often as he conquered. When David was good, there was probably no one better. But when he was bad, he was bad. Yet God continued to use him. So if we're ready to face our giants, we need to let David's story inspire us. If God helped David then, he will help us now. Now look there in verse 4. We know Goliath, the giant, and it depends on how you define a cubit, but some say he's around 9 feet tall. We think Eric, he's gone today, but we think he's tall, and, Goliath would dwarf him. And the Bible calls him in verse 4 that Philistine champion. The best of the best. The Israelite army knew all about him, and they were scared to death of him. And then we've got David, this little shepherd boy, running errands for his father. And his job, we know, was to bring food to his older brothers. In fact, if they made sticky notes back in that day, I think his sticky note would probably say, take food to brothers, watch the sheep, and go home. That was basically his day. Goliath was an unexpected obstacle. David did not wake up that morning planning to go one-on-one with this giant. David hadn't spent that morning, drawing up battle plans. I'm thinking danger and difficulty were probably some of the last thing on David's minds. Remember just a chapter later, in chapter 16, Samuel had appointed him or anointed him to be king. And it was obvious God had great plans for him. And that you would think, wouldn't you, that meant life's going to go smoothly. And we've all been there, haven't we? When we thought life was going to go smoothly, and then all of a sudden, what happened? It all fell apart. David's going about his day, trying to do what's right, and this obstacle shows up in his path. And we can relate, can't we? I want you to think about this. Some of the most difficult challenges that we faced in life may be the ones that we never saw coming. Minor, major, physical, emotional, inconvenient, devastating. The unexpected can be the most difficult. And I think at times those disappointments are the giants in life that can be the hardest to overcome, because you know what? We weren't expecting them. We're going about our day, trying to do what's right, trying to please God, and all of a sudden this obstacle shows up in our path. think sometimes God will put a Goliath in our path for us to find the David that's within us. You know, not only do difficult circumstances hit us when we're not expecting them, that they can hit us as well when we're most vulnerable. Satan knows when we're down and out. We don't have to be overcome and overwhelmed by the pressures of life. You know, no matter how big our problem may appear, this story tells us we know that we can defeat it with God's help. And you know, the old cliche is this: it doesn't matter where the pressure lies. It matters whether the pressure is going to push us away from God or if it's going to push us closer to God. Turn for a minute and we'll turn back here to another verse we know well, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. Isaiah 40, verse 31. A great promise we know that's from God. And I mean, there's lots of lessons here in just this one little verse, but I just want to make a couple of comments. Yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They'll run and not get tired. They'll walk and not become weary. A promise from God, strength. And specifically here, I want you to notice new strength. What's that tell us? That there's some strength that we hadn't had before, right? If it's new, that God will give us. And we know that word there, gain, or that word renew, depending on your version, is to exchange our strength for God's strength, you know, turn in our worn out batteries for His. And we're called to run and not get tired, and then He even says walk and not become weary. In other words, I think it's this: keep living for the Lord even when life's circumstances have slowed us down from maybe running for the Lord to just walking for the Lord.
I can relate to that here.
Yeah. And you know what? Maybe some of us are just crawling for the Lord. But you know what? Keep making progress. Keep making progress. You know, that idea of giving strength to the weary is a theme right in through these passages in Isaiah. In Isaiah 40, look back at verse 29, he says, He gives strength to the weary. And the verse we just read, gain new strength. And in chapter 41, verse 10, he says, don't fear, don't anxiously look about, I'm your God. He says, I will strengthen you. God, here's another quote, and I don't know who it's from, but it says this: God gives us the strength to press against the pressure that's pressing us. Let me read that again. God gives us the strength to press against the pressure that's pressing us. Turn back to 1 Samuel 17 now. You know, we've all seen our giant. And the question is he all that we see? Because the typical response when Goliath showed up on the battlefield was fear and trembling. I mean, the very sight of this larger-than-life person was just intimidating. And if his size wasn't enough, you know, his booming threats. And that's kind of setting the scene when David shows up here. You know, Goliath is up to his usual intimidations. Look, I think it's in verse 24. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. I mean, no one is willing to go forward. But when David shows up to bring food to his brothers, the story changes. David didn't get upset that he had an unexpected problem. He decides, I'm going to deal with it. And he does. Look at verse 26. Because I think here David asks two amazing questions. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel?" That's the first question. Second question is this: "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" I mean, David's asking, what's going to be done to the guy who kills him? David does not ask, why is this happening to me? Or, Lord, how could you allow this to take place? He's kind of like Tony, we're kind of talking similar to this in class this morning, and Tony said, sometimes you don't ask why, you ask why not me. Because we all know these negative questions are born out of worry and anxiety that we all have. And all these questions assume our problem is greater than God. And David knew that God is greater than any obstacle he'd ever face. So basically he's asking, what happens when I win? You talk about a positive attitude. Where everyone else saw an obstacle, David sees an opportunity. Verses 45 through 47, David's response, we know, to Goliath. He speaks to his problem. He focuses on God. Let me read these here, and I want you to notice, because he mentions the Lord or God 7 times. 7 times in these few verses. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands. I'll strike you down. I'll remove your head. I'll give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines the state of the birds of the sky, the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spirit. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Now that's some confidence, isn't it? Confidence in God. Think about that maybe unexpected enemy we may be facing today. I don't know exactly what each of you are going through. It's different for all of us. And it could very well be that our Goliath, it seems like an impossible problem. And if it's stealing our peace and our joy and our sleep, we need to remember the verse Larry read for us, which is one of just many. John 16:33, in this world you will have what? Tribulation. But aren't you thankful that there's not a period there? But take courage, he says, because I have what? Overcome. Overcome. And we know, because this world is filled with sin and brokenness, we are going to face problems on this side of eternity. But Jesus gave us a better promise. He said that even when we face troubles in this life, He says, be of good cheer, or take courage. In other words, have confidence. Have confidence. David had confidence. And whatever giant we're facing, take a new approach. Instead of comparing that obstacle to our ability, compare the obstacle to God's ability. I mean, that's all he does when he's sitting here talking to the Goliath. He's mentioning the Lord over and over and over again. You know, David made a different comparison, didn't he? David looked at the Goliath, he looked at Goliath, but then where did he look? Did he look at himself or did he look to God? He looked to God. And he knew that 9-foot Goliath was smaller than God. You know, I think our problem, or may I say my problem at times, we think it's bigger than we are, which maybe it is. But it's not bigger than God. If we had to face it on our own, yeah, we'd be in trouble. But we don't have to face it on our own. The battle belongs to the Lord. The Lord. Let me close with this. Just a few thoughts. Maybe that I think that we find in these verses, and I know there's a lot more lessons here, but for defeating giants, for defeating those obstacles in our life. And I want you to look back at verse 33. The first thing, David ignored the criticism of others. Saul told him, you're not able. And think about that. This is an older man telling this young boy, you can't do this. But did that stop him? No. Number 2, verse 36, he remembers the victories God gave him in the past. Notice, he uses the phrase, the Lord who delivered. And he talks about bears and all these things that he defeated, lions. Remembered our past victories. Number 3, he spoke positive words of victory, not defeat, when he said in verse 47, the battle's the Lord's. And to look back in verse 45, the last one, David was totally dependent on God. When he says, I come to you in the name of the Lord. You know, if there was a Las Vegas back in that day, Goliath would probably have been about a 40-point favorite, wouldn't he? God's not surprised or intimidated by oversized obstacles. He's defeated giants before, and he can do it again. In fact, it seems kind of like maybe that's God's specialty. So don't be afraid of the size of our giant or giants. Focus on the size of God and who He is. And let God conquer our Goliath, because the battle belongs to the Lord. Randy, come lead us in an invitation song.